Welcome to E-Bible Fellowship's Evening Bible Studies with your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann. For more studies, visit our website at www.ebiblefellowship.org. And now, here's Chris McCann.
Good evening and welcome to E-Bible Fellowship's Bible study in the book of Genesis. Tonight is study number 3 in Genesis chapter 34, and we are continuing to read from verse 1. And Dinah, the daughter of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. And when Shechem the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her, and lay with her, and defiled her. And his soul clave unto Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the damsel, and spake kindly unto the damsel. And Shechem spake unto his father Hamor, saying, Get me this damsel to wife. And Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah his daughter. Now his sons were with his cattle in the field, and Jacob held his peace until they were come. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out unto Jacob to commune with him. And the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved, and they were very wroth, because he had wrought folly in Israel, in lying with Jacob's daughter, which thing ought not to be done. And I'll stop reading there. Now, we discussed last time how the idea of Dinah, who's a daughter of Jacob, and Jacob is Israel. So she's a virgin from everything we can conclude in this passage. She's a virgin daughter of Israel. And so we went to some other scriptures where God uses that kind of language concerning the nation of Israel, or the spiritual Israel of God that is made up of the elect. And he refers to the daughter of Zion, or the daughter of Jerusalem, and so forth, or the daughter of my people. And so we want to just keep that in mind, but we're going to continue and try to find what else we can discover concerning this passage. And what we find out is that this passage has similarities or links to two other Bible passages in particular, and we will take a look at that as we go on. But first, let me just give another overview, so to remind you, before we go to these other passages, of some of the things that are going on here. For example, we know Dinah is a virgin. That's why she's spoken of as being defiled and made unclean. We know that she was forced. Actually, in verse 2 of Genesis 34, when Shechem the son of Hamor, the Hivite prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and defiled her. This word defiled, which is Strong 6031, is translated as humbled in some places, and forced in some places. And in the other two passages we look at, it will be translated as forced. So keep that in mind, even though it's not the English word forced, it is the same Hebrew word, and that is what connects it to these other two places. And we will find that there is this statement, folly in Israel. In verse 7 of Genesis 34, because he had wrought folly in Israel in lying with Jacob's daughter, which thing ought not to be done. That too will be found in these passages, and that Dinah is avenged, and the reason the sons of Jacob give for avenging her is that she was treated as a harlot. That'll be significant for us to keep in mind. Also, although it's not found here, in the other two passages, hatred will come into view, as well as marriage will be consistent in all three passages. In Genesis 34, Shechem wants to marry, and one of the other two passages we go to, marriage will be in view, where there's actual marriage. And in the third passage, there will be a refusal to marriage, but marriage is in view in all the cases. And death. We understand here in Genesis 34 that Levi and Simeon will come upon Shechem and with their sword, and they will kill all the males, all the older men. And that will be in view. Death will come into view in the other two places. So there is these similarities, and that's why we're going to these other two passages. And our hope is to, in looking at them, we will learn some things about Genesis 34, because this is our main focus of Bible study right now. And this is how we study the scripture. We go elsewhere, and although when we do go elsewhere, we may find some very interesting things. And actually, in one of the two passages we're going to turn to, we will go a little deeper into the spiritual meaning and try and lay some of that out. But not the other, not the second passage, because that's a little bit more complicated, and I don't have as much insight into that, which is fine, because we're not studying that other passage, actually. As far as it's not our central focus. Genesis 34 is. So just keep that in mind, that when studying the Bible, yes, we go here a little, there a little, but if we, every time we did that, we went in depth and we were as thorough as possible, we would never get through the book of Genesis. And we're, taking quite a bit of time as it is. We've already been studying this book for several years, and it appears we'll be studying it for a few more years to come. So if we want to get done before 2033, we can't do that. But why don't we now turn to the first passage that has some of these similarities. There's 7 overall similarities, and what I'll do is I'll read the passage and maybe comment a little bit in reading. And then we'll go to the second passage, and I'll make some comments on that. And finally, after reading both passages, we will take a look at the 7 similarities that are actually not found in each passage. That is, there are 7 points of connection, but I think that there's only 6 in one and 6 in the other. It's just not all 7 in both places. Okay, let's first go to Deuteronomy chapter 22. Deuteronomy 22, and I'll start reading in verse 13, where it says, "If any man take a wife, and go in unto her, and hate her, and give occasions of speech against her, and bring up an evil name upon her, and say, I took this woman, and when I came to her, I found her not a maid. Then shall the father of the damsel and her mother take and bring forth the tokens of the damsel's virginity unto the elders of the city in the gate. And the damsel's father shall say unto the elders, I gave my daughter unto this man to wife, and he hateth her. And lo, he has given occasions of speech against her, saying, I found not thy daughter a maid. And yet these are the tokens of my daughter's virginity. They shall spread the cloth before the elders of the city." Now, this is the law of God. This is the law of God, and God is establishing a law concerning marriage, and remember at this time in Israel's history, there was a law on the books that allowed for a man only, not the wife, but allowed for a man to put away his wife for a matter of uncleanness. And you can read about that in Deuteronomy 24, verse 1. And it says there, when a man has taken a wife and married her, and it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes, because he has found some uncleanness in her, then let him write her a bill of divorcement and give it in her hand and send her out of his house. Now, God gave that law because he had entered into a spiritual marriage with the nation of Israel, and he divorced her because of Israel's uncleanness. Now, maybe we'll get into that some more later. I'm not sure. But anyway, that's the reason why the law is on the books, because God operates according to his own law. He has submitted himself to his law. He cannot do something that is not according to law. And so for him to put away Israel, to divorce national Israel, there had to be a law allowing it, and there was. Well, here, the man is coming before the elders of the city, according to this passage of law, and he is charging his wife with really uncleanness, that she has been involved in fornication prior to marriage. And so he says, when I came to her, I took this woman, and when I came to her, I found her not a maid. And we know that means not a virgin because of what the father is reported to have said in verse 15. Then shall the father of the damsel and her mother take and bring forth the tokens of the damsel's virginity. And that is a cloth that they spread before the elders of the city. Now, historically, it probably worked out that after the marriage night, the honeymoon, that it would have been in a house nearby the parents, or maybe they're in the same home, and so the mother goes in and cleans the sheet, or removes the sheets from the bed, puts down new fresh sheets. But what she does is she saves that sheet, because there would be evidence, there would be blood. And she doesn't wash it, she doesn't clean it, but she stores it away. And why? Well, for the possibility of something like this happening. And so the father and mother produce the sheet. Here are the tokens of our daughter's virginity. Actually, it's the father who says this. And because this man has made an accusation, but once the cloth is spread forth before the elders, they see the proof that she was a virgin. And so we read in verse 19, and they shall immerse him in 100 shekels of silver, and give them unto the father of the damsel, because he has brought up an evil name upon a virgin of Israel. You see how that fits with Dinah, the daughter of Israel, a virgin. And also with those other scriptures we read the last time. There is an evil name brought up because he lied, or he was incorrect. And the punishment is this 100 shekels of silver he'll be immersed in. And notice at the end of verse 9, and she shall be his wife. He may not put her away all his days. That is the punishment of the man who sought divorce, yet the elders, after chastising him and fining him, say, now you may never divorce. for any reason, even if she were to involve herself in some kind of adultery or fornication or anything, any manner of uncleanness whatsoever, you may not divorce. So, this is the passage we'll come back to and try and explain, and I think we'll be able to, the spiritual meaning. But it does go on to say here, it gives the other side. And in verse 20, but if this thing be true, and the tokens of virginity be not found for the damsel, that is, there's no bedsheet, there's no evidence, for whatever reason, they did not store it, or maybe what he said is true, and the lack of the cloth is taken as though what the man is saying is true, and therefore, in verse 21, then they shall bring out the damsel to the door of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her with stones that she die, because she hath wrought folly in Israel to play the whore in her father's house, so shalt thou put evil away from among you. And there we see our word folly. It's the same word that was in Genesis 34 when the sons of Jacob said, for he has wrought folly in Israel, which thing ought not to be done. And here the woman, and this would be a difference. It's said of Shechem in Genesis 34, but here it's said of the woman who had entered into a marriage not being a virgin, and she is said to have played the whore. And that also is a similarity with Genesis 34 that we'll look at. We'll take a look at that later. So this passage presents both sides of the situation concerning a man who is seeking divorce for a matter of uncleanness or fornication, and God says, okay, now he could be incorrect, and the cloth would prove it, or he can be correct because there is no cloth to prove it, and so again, you may want to ponder that and just study that. We will try to come back to that at a later time and go through this passage. But let's turn now to a second passage, and it's in 2 Samuel chapter 13. In 2 Samuel 13, this is right after David, King David of Israel, has been rebuked and chastened by God. Actually, that chastening continues on for many years in the life of David, because he committed adultery with Bathsheba and then had her wife Uriah the Hittite slain with the sword of the enemy, the children of Ammon. And so God, as part of the chastisement, tells him the sword will not depart from your house. In the very next chapter, 2 Samuel 13, we find the sword is doing damage in David's house. Now, let's read, starting in verse 1 of 2 Samuel 13. And it came to pass after this that Absalom, the son of David, had a fair sister whose name was Tamar. And Amnon, the son of David, loved her. And Amnon was so vexed that he fell sick for his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin. And Amnon thought it hard for him to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother. And Jonadab was a very subtle man. And he said unto him, Why art thou, being the king's son, lean from day to day? Wilt thou not tell me? And Amnon said unto him, I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. And Jonadab said unto him, lay thee down on thy bed, and make thyself sick? And when thy father cometh to thee, say unto him, I pray thee, let my sister Tamar come, and give me meat, and dress the meat in my sight, that I may see it, and eat it at her hand. And this is what he does. He takes the counsel of Jonadab, and David grants his request, and sends Tamar, his daughter, to her half-brother's house, Amnon, to make cakes in his sight. And we read in verse 9, and she took a pan and poured them out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, Have out all men from me. And they went out every man from him. And Amnon said unto Tamar, Bring the meat into the chamber, that I may eat of thine hand. And Tamar took the cakes which she had made, and brought them into the chamber to Amnon her brother. And when she had brought them unto him to eat, he took hold of her, and said unto her, Come, lie with me, my sister. And she answered him, Nay, my brother, do not force me. Now there is our word that is in Genesis 34, but actually it's not in Deuteronomy 22. Remember I said that not all 7 of these connections will be in each passage, but each of them will have several of them. And so here, come with me, my sister. And she answered him, Nay, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing ought to be done in Israel. Do not thou this folly. There it is, that statement that was in Genesis 34, verse 7, as well as in Deuteronomy 22:21. Do not thou this folly, or before that, no such thing ought to be done in Israel. Do not thou this folly. And he is forcing her, as Shechem forced Dinah, and as the sons of Jacob said, he has committed folly in Israel. And so Amnon is forcing his sister, and she is pointing out, if you do this, it will be causing folly in Israel. Well, then we read in verse 13, And I, whither shall I cause my shame to go? And as for thee, thou shalt be as one of the fools in Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, speak unto the king, for he will not withhold me from thee. That is, the king would give her in marriage. Now keep in mind that they are half-brother, half-sister. That is David the father, but different mothers. And we know in Israel's history that Abraham was married to Sarah. So they would have seen, therefore, that this would have been no problem. Yes, the king would give Tamar to her half-brother Amnon if he had requested it, but we'll see that he does not. Well, unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time in this study. Lord willing, we'll get together in our next Bible study and pick this up. And it's really very interesting how God has brought these accounts together.
Thank you for joining us for eBible Fellowship's Evening Bible Studies with your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann. For more studies and information, visit our website at www.ebiblefellowship.org. Until our next Bible study, may the Lord's perfect will be done.